I got the rear end all back together and working. I drove the truck last night and this morning to take the dogs out for their runs. The brakes on the back end are working pretty good. This thing is still rattling. It's been rattling for a while. I got new shocks for it last year and took it into a shop and had them put on. That didn't solve the problem. I thought it was probably the front end. The brakes rattling like they did on the back end with these studs coming loose back here. The pins that the caliper slides back and forth on coming loose like they did on the back end. So I brought the front end in here now. I took the front wheel, and if you take and rock the wheels up and down and back and forth, you can see how the ball joints are. And it wouldn't move from the top to the bottom back and forth, but it did move from side to side back and forth. I took this into a shop 2 years ago and had the guy put these Yukon hubs on there. This left front hub went out, and I was out the road, I don't know, 20 miles, 25 miles or so, out on a logging road and whatnot. In the wintertime it was cold, and I limped back into town. Could only go about 15 miles an hour at the most. But I bought these Yukon hubs to put on here. They're locking hubs so you can unlock the front end. And so I had those on hand. I took them in to a guy who does mechanic work here in town, and he replaced these hubs for me, both sides. And when he did, he replaced the ball joints on this side. I also got new U-joints, the universal joints that fit on the axle stubs, the axles that come out here and go into the differential. I got new U-joints for those, and those are greasable. So he replaced the ball joints here on the left side, but he didn't replace the ones on the right side. And I thought maybe those ball joints were bad. And it may be that they are bad. I don't know. I haven't got that far yet. But I did buy new ball joints in case these are all bad. But once I got to looking and got this apart, it's not the ball joints. It's the tie rod ends that are bad. So I got to go order new tie rod ends. Surprisingly enough, this front brake is perfectly fine. There's not much wear on the pads, and the brake works fine. The rotor is in good shape, so I don't think I'm going to have to replace those. In fact, I don't think I'm going to replace them. I know I'm not going to replace them. I'm going to take it off and see how it looks once I get it off, but so far they work fine, so there's no point in changing them. One of the things I do have to check is the anti-lock brake system. I've got a light on it, and I've had a light on it since that front hub went out, and I don't know whether this sending unit, I suspected this sending unit might have went bad from that hub going bad. The mechanic said that's pretty common for that to happen. Why he didn't change it, I don't know. But anyway, I've got a new wire for that. I can reach in through this way and change that fuel filter a lot easier. But I got to looking in there, and it looks like one of the wires going into the starter is fraying pretty good. Now I don't know why that thing would be having a problem. There's nothing gets in there on that starter wire. But I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and take this fender liner off on this side so I can get access in there to that side of that engine and check out that wire going into that starter, and also change that fuel filter. Now I've changed that fuel filter 7 or 8 times, just reaching up through the bottom there, but it's getting kind of hard for me to reach up in there to get that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that while I've got this fender liner off. I've got to change this cable, like I said, for the anti-lock brake sensor. Anyway, the brakes look good on it. That's a good thing, although I do have new brakes and stuff for it, new rotors and calipers and pads, but this one on this side is fine. I'm working on the front wheel hub of my 2008 Dodge 2500 four-wheel drive with a 6.7. I'm disassembling the front hub. Now normally on almost all these new cars they have unit bearings in them, and when the bearings go out you pull the whole unit off, the whole unit bearing off, and replace it, and the front wheels are locked in. So when you select in four-wheel drive, you select in the transfer case, and then that applies power to the front end. But the front end is constantly running motion through the axle, through the differential, and up through the drive shaft to the transfer case, even though it's disconnected at the transfer case. So all of this stuff is turning constantly. Now I had the unit bearing on this left side went out on me about 3 years ago, and I took the truck in then to a mechanic here in town and had him change them out. And I'd previously purchased these freewheeling locking hubs from Yukon. There are several companies that make these as an aftermarket deal for these Dodge pickups, and I suppose other pickups too. But it gives you the option of locking and unlocking the axle from the front end, so the front wheels will actually freewheel. And that gained me about 3 miles per gallon around here locally when I have this unlocked. And then of course, just like the old days and the old four-wheel drive pickups, when you want to lock the front end in, you got to get out and turn the hubs in, the locking hubs in, and that locks the wheels then to the axle. And then you can still change in and out of four-wheel drive by unlocking the transfer case. So that makes a pretty good deal for economy. That saves fuel economy. And it makes the truck a lot easier to drive. There's not near as much friction or anything in here on the front wheels turning them. It steers better, it drives better, it rides better. The other thing that it does is these hubs are like the old hubs on the old trucks and stuff, that you can pull the hubs off and repack the bearings. So on the unit bearings, when the bearings go out, you just take the whole unit off and replace the whole thing. They last about 70,000 miles or so, more or less. Mine was about 70,000 miles, 75,000 miles when it went out on this left side. The right side was still good. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm taking this apart to clean it up, check the bearings out, repack everything, and put it back together. Now, this is the first time I've done this on this type of unit. I've done it many times on two-wheel drive cars and four-wheel drive pickups, so I know what I was doing on those, but this is put together a little bit different. This is more modern. So I've started already, and the first thing, of course, was to take this portion here, the hub, or the locking portion off, and there's, what, 6 Allen head cap screws in there, and then and an O-ring on that, and then this is the cam that locks it in and out. And then there is a spring retainer that goes in there. Now, the old ones would either have a retainer ring that you'd pop out and be a solid ring that you just stick a screwdriver or something in and pop one out and pull it out of a slot milled into the inside of the hub here. This one has a slot milled in there, but it's not near, it's tapered on the back side, and so this is kind of a spring that fits in there. And then this is the retainer. This is what cams in and out, pushes in and out. So that's going to be cleaned up. So now I've got it apart that far, and I've run into another spring style retainer ring in there. I'll start to get that off of there. Okay. It feels like there's a spring in behind that, because as soon as I popped that loose, that started pushing out on that retaining ring, on that spring. Well, there's that little spring. That's on the axle end itself, and now the whole thing comes out. This is the gear. This is the portion that slides in and out. There's a spacer there on the inside of that. This gear engages on the axle, and then this gear engages in the hub. And then there's a big spring. Okay. And then there's the axle nut in behind that, and that's going to take a spanner for that. I'll see if that one I made for the rear axle will work on that. Instead of a hex nut in there, that's got a round nut with slots on it on the outside edge of it. So it takes a spanner instead of the hex. And behind that is another washer that's got tabs on it. I thought maybe it might come out and you bend the tabs out to lock the nut down, but I don't see that. Well, when we get in that far, we'll figure out some way to get that nut off of there. And I don't think that spanner that I made for that rear axle will work on that, because this axle sticks out there farther. This is the socket spanner that I made for that rear axle, and of course it won't work. It won't fit in there. Not near long enough, deep enough to fit in there. No, it's too tight. Now the ones on the back, I was just able to take a screwdriver in there and turn them, but this is preloaded down pretty tight. It's actually too tight. So I'm not going to be able to do that. So I got to figure something else out. Alright, it's not ideal, but I got it. Okay, so there's a nut. Now then, I wonder if we got another nut in there. Sometimes they'll do that, they'll put two nuts in there. And that's exactly what they did. They got another nut in there. And that one is too far in there to turn out the way I did with this one. I'm going to need a spanner for that. Or some kind of a socket or something to reach in there. Get that out of there. Yeah, that one ain't going to come out of there easy. He's got them in there too tight. Got too much preload on those bearings actually. So I'm going to have to figure something out. But now that I have this other first nut out of there, I can take it, either figure out some way to make a spanner for that, or a socket for that or something, or go down and see if I can buy one. I can go down to the Napa store and see if they have one there or something. Anyway, alright, there's what I need. I need some kind of a wrench, a socket to get in there to get that, to get on that nut. And it's got just 4 slots in it around the perimeter. I'll have to measure out and see what diameter that is, but it's also got to be deep enough to reach in quite a ways, at almost a good 4 inches deep, to get in there over that hub. Alright, it fits. Looked online to see about getting a socket for this, but I couldn't really tell which size that I needed online. Well, I took the nut down to the Napa store and I found one, and of course it was the bigger one, and the little one was $29, which I could have got online for between $9 and $15. This one here was $50. So, and then, like I said, I could have got it online. There it goes. This has the ears on it to fit into these slots on this nut. And there's a nice one from OTC that actually fits over the outside of the nut, fits over the top of it, and has tabs on the inside of it to fit into the slots. It would be better. It'd be, because this one just fits on there. Kind of fits into the slots, but it can flop out of them pretty easy. So the OTC one would be kind of nice. Those were, I think, $50 online. And I did see one place that had one for used one. A guy had a used one for $15 or something like that. But again, I don't know whether that's the right size to fit on this particular nut or not. There we go. So now the hub should just slide off of there. Yeah, there it did. Okay. You got the inner bearing. I'll have to clean it up and inspect it. Feels good so far. On the back side here, we've got a seal and the inner bearing, or the big bearing on the inside. So I'll have to get this stuff cleaned up. Oh, there's the sensor for the, well, that speed ring is on the back of that hub there. Okay. So anyway, you get all this stuff cleaned up, get these bearings washed up, and the hub washed up, and everything repacked, put it back together. So this is the axle, this stub axle that sticks out here. The Yukon provides that. This portion here, the axle goes back to the yoke back there through this casting. So this yoke right here, the outer portion of it, this is for the axle, that's part of the Yukon kit. And then this part here is just regular. I bought new universal joints to have him put in there. I don't remember what brand they were, but they're supposed to be good quality ones. And they've got a Zerk in them, so you can grease them up. Problem is that he put these in backwards. This Zerk is pointed out this direction, and when the tire is on and everything's mounted up, you can't get on it with a grease gun. So it should have been turned around so the Zerk was sticking out this way, and then you could get on it and grease it when the tire is on and stuff, doing a regular lube job on the truck. Put new ball joints on, and the upper ball joint here has a Zerk on it. That's fine. The lower one is also greasable, but you can't put a Zerk in it. You have to, or not run it with a Zerk in it, because it comes right out the middle of the ball joint on the top right there. And so if you have a Zerk on there, then this yoke will hit it. So you have to just put a plug in there, and then whenever you grease that, you have to take the plug out and put a 90-degree Zerk in there so you can get a grease gun on it. Person's changing those, you should get the style of ball joints. They make some that actually have the Zerk come out at an angle and not right dead center like that for the bottom one.